Hello, today we're going to talk about neoliberalism, which is essentially the belief that markets are the fairest, most efficient way to allocate societal resources, and therefore markets should permeate every aspect of our lives. When you're getting a business degree, either as an undergraduate or a graduate, we can think of business like a game, and we teach you a lot of things about how to play that game well. So, for example, if you're going to learn soccer, you'd have to learn a set of skills, right? Like kicking the ball, passing the ball, doing headers. Same thing in business. We teach you business skills like how to do invoices, how to write a memo, how to goal set, things like that, the basic skills. Also, if you want to play soccer, you need to understand plays and have a game plan. We teach you that too, right? We talk a lot about business strategy. What we don't often do during a business education is to take a step back and ask ourselves, should we be playing the game of soccer? Or the game of business? What does the game of business entail? In soccer, we're going for goals. What are we going for? What are we trying to achieve in business? Should we be putting our resources behind that? Is this game as a whole worth playing? We focus on being good at the game. We don't often question or challenge the idea of the game itself. And today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the game, which I'm going to call neoliberalism. And this connects to business and to the entire rest of this class because we can think of what's going on in an organization. We can think of it across many different levels. And at one level, we have the business level, which is strategy. How can this business be successful? At a slightly higher level, we have the industry. What's going on in this industry? And we'll talk about a five forces analysis to understand industry. And then at an even larger level, we have what's going on in society as a whole. And that's neoliberalism. That's kind of the context for everything that happens in businesses in the United States and honestly in most of the world. So that is why we're talking about neoliberalism today. That's how it's going to connect to the rest of the content for this course. We're going to talk about five aspects of neoliberalism. First, I'm going to define how neoliberalism is a return to laissez-faire economics. I'm going to talk about how neoliberalism is defined by a blind faith in the power of markets. We'll talk about how neoliberalism is an all-encompassing cultural paradigm. We'll talk about how neoliberalism prioritizes growth above good. And finally, we'll talk about, I'll defend neoliberalism a little bit. I'll critique my critiques of neoliberalism to try and give you guys a more balanced perspective on it. Let's hop right in and start talking about what neoliberalism is and how it's a return to laissez-faire economics. Neoliberalism is a confusing word because people see liberalism at the end of it and they think of this, right? They think of liberals in the sense of the American political system where liberals are progressives, people on the left, right? That's not what liberalism means in this case. Liberalism is being used more in this sense. This is Ron Paul. He was the libertarian candidate for president a few times. And that's what we mean by liberalism in this case is libertarianism, is liberty, is freedom. And specifically, we're talking about freedom of markets. The other half of this word is neo, which hopefully you know means new. What's new about this free market? Well, we tried laissez-faire capitalism, free market. We tried that before in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And this might be best encapsulated by a case with the Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford wanted to pay his workers a higher wage because he felt that it was a good thing to do for society, that people deserve to have a consistent job and make a living wage and be successful. And so he wanted to pay his workers more. And he specifically said that he was doing it because he wanted to make their lives better, not because it was a business necessity. His investors turned around and sued him, and they said, look, Ford is not in business to make his employees happy. He's in business to make us happy. We're investors. He's supposed to give us a return on our investment. He's supposed to maximize our return on investment. And so they took him to court and they sued him and they won. The court ruled that yes, that a company is ultimately financially responsible, is legally obligated to maximize shareholder value and return on investment. That is a vast oversimplification of that story and that court case, but those are the broad strokes. So we had this laissez-faire capitalism embodied by the ultimate importance, the preeminent position of making money for shareholders and unregulated markets. And that went okay until the late 1920s when we had the stock market crash. And when that happened, we have FDR coming in and offering America a new deal. And we kind of went away from this very laissez-faire approach to economics, and we started to regulate our markets more. So we passed banking regulation. We started, instead of having everything provided for by the marketplace, the government started to provide some services, like Social Security. When you get old, the government will take care of you. And so we started to move away a little bit from complete laissez-faire economy. We started to put a little bit more regulation into the economy, and have the government offer social services. That also went okay for a while. And then in the 70s, we start to have economic problems again, and we have stagflation. In step Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and both of them really start to push this idea of unregulated markets, of what they call supply side economics or trickle down economics. The idea that if we just get out of the way, get rid of regulation, and let the markets do their thing, they're going to create prosperity for everyone. That's the best thing we can do, is deregulate markets, get out of the way, and then an unfettered market-driven economy is going to make life better for everyone. And this really marks the beginning of what we consider the neoliberal era. So the early 80s is when we really consider the neoliberal era coming into its own, when it's this return to the very laissez-faire, unfettered markets that we had at the beginning of the century as well. So, in more concrete ways, neoliberalism is an economic perspective that endorses a broad set of policies. For example, deregulation across all industries. Neoliberalism supports having deregulated industry as possible. It also supports free trade and open borders as well. In those cases, trade rules, trade regulations, tariffs, those things are challenges on the freedom of the market, the same way that borders undermine the freedom of the labor market by restricting movement. And so it's really the idea of just getting out of the way in every way possible and letting the markets do their thing. As you'll notice, these are not partisan issues, right? These cut across both political parties in the United States. So we often think of deregulation as more of a Republican position. Open borders we see as more of a Democratic position. And then free trade, really up until Trump, both parties were fully behind free trade. So it's important to note here that when I'm discussing neoliberalism, I'm not talking about Republican economic policies. I'm not talking about Democratic economic policies. Really, both political parties are fully invested in the neoliberal system.